Welcome, everyone. Welcome. This is the official first episode of my podcast, and this is the official launch of this podcast. So welcome once again to Marina's Manna, where some will be offended and some will be encouraged simply by sharing God's truth. I want to start off by introducing myself. I am your host, Marina, and I am extremely excited for this long-awaited release of my podcast. And so let's just get right into it. This is something that the Lord has placed in my heart for the longest time, and this is something that He's spoken over me for so long. And I've kind of like put a delay on it, because just a lot going on. But even through the midst of all that, God still had grace over me. And so here I am today. And so because this is the very first episode, I want to start off with a series, our very first series, which this series is called It's Time for a Comeback. And by comeback, what do I mean by that? I don't mean like comeback as in like the smart remark that you usually say when you're going at it and bickering with somebody. But by comeback, I mean it's time for a comeback for every lukewarm Christian, for everyone who has felt this nudge in their heart to come to Christ, for everyone who has felt like they have no hope, they have no purpose in life. It's time to come back to Christ, because if you don't know, we are living in the end days and Jesus is coming back for His bride. So let's get into it. Let's get into this series. So today I want to start off by wanting to truly introduce myself in the aspect of I want you guys to know who I am. I want you guys to know who it is that's hosting this new podcast, which if I didn't mention, it's Marina's Manna. This podcast is called Marina's Manna, hence, my name, Marina. And so, once again, let's just get right into a little bit of my testimony and how I came to the Lord, only because I truly want you guys to know who I am. I truly want you to know that I am truly passionate for the Lord, and that I'm really just after Him, and all I really want is the Lord. So let's get into my testimony about how I came to the Lord. So just to kind of sum everything up, from my childhood, I was raised in church. I was raised Baptist specifically. And if you were to ask me today, what does it mean to be Baptist? I have no clue. I have absolutely no idea what it means to be Baptist, because the way that I was raised more so in religion. So I knew of God, but I didn't know who God was the way that I do now. So when I was growing up, I knew Christianity and God as religion, but I didn't know that God was truly relationship. And so fast forward to, actually, let's stay in my childhood. When I was a child, I was raised in the church, but I would consider ourselves lukewarm. And by ourselves, I mean my family, like lukewarm Christians. Like there'd be a season where we would go to church for like 3 weeks, and then we would stop going to church for like a whole year, and then we would go to church again, and then we would stop, and then we would go again, and so on and so forth, until I would say about middle school, high school is when we just completely stopped going to church for quite a while. Or like, at least for me, like as I got older, I just never really pursued going to church, because the way that I was raised, it was more so of like, oh, well, in Christianity, you can only do this. You can't do that. You have to dress like this. You can't dress like that. You have to speak like this. You can't speak in this manner, without any explanation. And so growing up, the Lord used my grandma heavily in planting the seeds within my siblings and I. And why do I say that is because as children, because my grandma practically lived with us, because she helped raise my siblings and I, she would gather us around the dinner table late at night, because my family, we were night owls. We stayed up as late as we possibly could. We were not morning people whatsoever. And I think to this day, we're not morning people, at least for me. I'm not a morning person. And so my grandma would gather us around the dinner table, and she would begin to teach us the word. She would begin to pray. She would teach us how to memorize Bible verses. And one of the Bible verses that I memorize to this day is Psalms 23, but in Spanish. El Señor es mi pastor, nada me faltará. En lugares delicados, pastos me hará descansar. Junto a aguas de reposo me pastoreará. You know the verse. So Psalms 23. And so anytime I see Psalms 23, I just think of my grandma, and it takes me back to those memories that I have with her, of her raising us in the Word of God, raising us in knowing how to pray, raising us in teaching us Bible verses, and having it, permanently in our brains, basically. And so as I got older, like I said, I stopped going to church. So it wasn't until I got into high school that, actually before that, it was in middle school, that when my parents split up, I fell into this deep depression, which I feel like even now nobody really knows about. But I fell into this deep depression in middle school, where I began to actually cut myself. And I still have the scars on my legs from that. I used to cut myself in middle school. And so fast forward to high school, I was sort of still depressed, but because in high school you start discovering who you are and all this stuff, you're getting mixed in with the wrong crowds and all this stuff, right? So I wasn't really paying attention to the depression and the anxiety that was still within me. So going into my senior year, I actually, a couple of days before my senior year, I remember I had my first full ever anxiety attack. And I feel like now that I remember going back into my childhood, I've always had anxiety, but I just never knew what it was. Because if in the Latin community, in the Hispanic community, depression and anxiety do not exist. It's not a thing. It's not a real thing. And so I just never knew what it was. Well, I never knew what it was. I didn't know how to describe it. I didn't know the word to put into what I was feeling. And so as I went into my senior year of high school, after having that very, very, very first anxiety attack, it's boom, a domino effect hit, to where I began to have anxiety attack after anxiety attack after anxiety attack out of nowhere. And it got so bad that I would wake up in the middle of my sleep having an anxiety attack. And not just that, but even the first time that I had went to the hospital after having an anxiety attack, because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was to have an anxiety attack. I didn't know what it felt like. And so for me, the first moment that I had an anxiety attack, my entire face went numb. I couldn't, my face was tingling. It was numb. I couldn't feel my arms. I couldn't feel my chest. I was hyperventilating. And I was just, I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was suffocating. And so from that first time that I had my anxiety attack, I actually went to the hospital. I was hospitalized for it. And that day I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. So after that, like I said, it was anxiety attack after anxiety attack. Even in my sleep, everywhere I went, no matter what it was always something that triggered it. Didn't know what it was whatsoever. So after I graduated high school, actually in high school, I remember that I would isolate myself a lot, to where even the group of friends, I was the type of teenager that I didn't care how I made you feel. I didn't care what I said. I didn't even care if I hurt your feelings. I would cut you off, because I feel like even then, I grew up with having trust issues. So because I was so isolated within myself, because I was depressed, because I had anxiety at the time, I always felt and I had, on top of that, trust issues, I always felt like I couldn't truly trust even the friends that I had. And I would keep my circle small. My circle was tight, right? I didn't have a lot of friends in high school, but because I didn't want to have a lot of friends in high school. And so because of that, if I even felt one little trigger, or I don't know, one little thing that threw me off about you, I would cut you off with no explanation, and I would avoid you. Whoever it was, I did not care. And so because I was in that depression, I was in that isolation, right? My mind was just oh my gosh, I don't even know the purpose of life. So after I graduated high school, I began to work. I was going to college and all this stuff. I ended up starting a job at a restaurant as a server. And at this job, now that the Lord has exposed certain things in my life, and he's removed the veil from my eyes. Now that I know that the atmosphere that I was in and the environment that I was in, it was not a healthy environment, because at this job there was a lot of number one, there was criminals. Not saying anything against criminals, but there were criminals who were into drugs. There was drug dealers. There was people who would drink, people who had all these different problems. And so when I was working at this job, I remember my anxiety had gotten so bad to where every single day at 19 years old, I would wake up feeling like I was going to have a heart attack. I would wake up feeling like I was going to die every day in my physical body. And why do I say I felt like I was having a heart attack? Because my chest would get tight, my left arm would go numb, and like I just had all these like heart attack symptoms because of my anxiety. And there was nothing that could calm it down, like at all. And I'm like, I would tell people I need to go to the hospital, but I can't, because it doesn't even feel like there's nothing wrong with me. I'm a healthy 19-year-old girl, but I feel like I'm dying every day. So it literally felt like death was knocking at my door, or it was like messing with my mind. It was tormenting me every single day for like 3-4 months. So eventually I leave that job, and after I leave that job, I start a new job as an assistant manager of a lash studio. And at this job, like I was there for about a year, and within that year, like, you know, nothing got better. And I would remember one night I cried out to the Lord and I said, Lord, I want Christian friends. I want Christian friends. And not even that, I remember another night, I cried out to the Lord and I said, Lord, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this by myself anymore. I need help. So it takes me to the scripture that says, it's in Psalms 145:18. The Lord is near all who call out to him, and all who call out to him with integrity. And so it's like when I called out to the Lord, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't even really know if I was truly talking to God, because I didn't know if he was truly hearing me, right? And so after I cried out those prayers, I remember one day at work, I was on the computer, I was on my Facebook account, and there was this desire in my heart to start going to a gym. And so as I'm like looking on Facebook, a gym that I want to go to, I was like, okay, Lord, I didn't say Lord, I'm sorry. I was like, okay, I want to go to a gym that's like brand new. They're barely building it, because I wanted to be like those OG members that leave like a legacy behind, that are right. I know. And so I find one in the area that I lived in, or that I live in even now. And so I gave them my information. I put my information in, and you know, I was waiting to hear back from them. So then a couple of days later, I'm at work again, and I get a call on my phone. So I told my coworker, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna step out and take this call. So when I step out, I pick up my phone and I'm like, hello? And you will never guess who it was. It was Pastor Mark Flores. And if you know Pastor Mark Flores, you know that he is a true man of God. So you see how God is in the details in all of this, okay? So as I pick up my phone and I'm like, hello, Pastor Mark is like, hey, I know you. And I'm like, hey, I know you too. Because Pastor Mark and his wife, Pastor Sharia, have been a long time family friend of my family. So I knew them, but I didn't really have a relationship with them to know them the way that I know them now, right? And so I believe that this is where the Lord started. This is where the Lord started. And so, you know, I give him my information. He gives me more information about this gym, because if at the time he was the manager of this gym, and Pastor Sharia, his wife, was the trainer of the boot camps that they were having. So he's like, yeah, come out to the boot camps. It's this, you know, it's from this day to this day at this time. So I started going, and I started going to this gym. And, you know, then my husband, who was my boyfriend then, started coming with me. And then my mother-in-law started coming with me. And so, so we started going to this boot camp. It was, I started going there September, October of 2019. So then, you know, I'm into the boot camp. I've been in it for a couple of months. You know, I've been a part of the gym from the very beginning for a couple months now. And then 2020 hits. And COVID comes in, and everything gets shut down. I mean, everything gets shut down. And as everything's getting shut down, I'm at home. So my grandma, she comes from Nicaragua, where she's from. That's where she lives. But she was coming to Houston, which is where I'm from. She's coming from Houston. She's coming to Houston because she has a couple of things that she needs to do over here. And, all of our family basically lives in Houston. And so she was only supposed to be here for 8 days, but because COVID shut everything down, I'm thinking about how strategic God is and how he's in the details. So my grandma comes back to Houston from Nicaragua, and she, because of COVID, everything got shut down. She ends up staying here for an entire year and a couple of months. And so she's staying at our house, my mom's house, when I was living with her and my siblings were there. And so I remember, on my 18th birthday, before all of this happened, I remember my mom had asked me, hey, what do you want for your birthday? And any typical 18-year-old would be like, oh, I want a shopping spree, or I want money, or I want this, I want a new car, or whatever, right? I told my mom, I want a Bible. I don't know why I had a desire to get a Bible, but I told her I want a Bible. So we went, she bought me a Bible. Not only did she buy it, but she had my name encrypted on it. I think that's the word, encrypted. But she had my name written on it. And so to this day, I still have that Bible. That's my very first Bible ever. So during COVID, when everything got shut down, I had this desire to begin to read my Bible because I'm like, we have nothing else to do. I have this Bible that's been sitting here collecting dust. I haven't picked it up since I got it. Might as well start. So I remember I began to read my Bible, and that's when I started truly to pursue the Lord, to go after the Lord, right? And so I would sit in my room, I would sit outside in the backyard, I would sit in the front of our house, and I would just read, and my grandma would come out and we would read together and whatnot, and we would just talk about God. And so I remember this date because this date is so special to me. It was April 4th, 2020, when my siblings and we gathered in my sister's room where my grandma was at because she was sleeping in there, and my sister was in there, and because, my siblings and we were close growing up, we all just gathered in there, and for me, I love to be around my grandma when she's here, so I was in there with her, and as we're in there, she's worshiping and praising God, and us kids, we're in the back goofing off and being very interruptive, but she doesn't stop. And as we're in there, I remember my grandma stops worshiping, and she looks at my siblings and she goes, can I ask you a question? Can I ask you guys something? And we're like, yeah. She goes, do you want to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior right now? And us, because we kind of we're trying to get past the moment, we were just yeah, we'll do it. And so my grandma led us through the whole repentance prayer. She led us to the Lord. And from that moment on, marked history. So after COVID happened, everything got shut down. I didn't see Pastor Mark and Sharia for quite a while, actually. So I started going to church. I started going to a Spanish church. And at the Spanish church, I started going after God more. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to know more. I wanted to know more of who God was. And so eventually in this church, I was in there for a while. My mom was actually the first one to go to this church, and she had invited me to start going with her. And I was like, yeah, I'll go. Growing up, I feel like I was never opposed to going to church. I never had an issue with it. But it wasn't something that I truly desired until I got older. And so my mom invites me to church, and I start going with her, and I'm like, I want to know more, And so, unfortunately, eventually my mom did leave the church because of a lot of stuff that, we're dealing with. And then COVID, because everybody was scared of COVID, and they were scared of getting sick because of all the deaths that were happening due to COVID. Everybody just wanted to stay home. So I stayed in the church to the point where they asked me to be their youth leader because the youth leader that they had was stepping down. And so I remember one day I was sitting with the pastor of this church, and he asked me, or he tells me, he goes, do you want to know a prayer your mom prayed while she was here? And I said, yeah, what is it? He said, one of your mom's prayer was that one of her children would come to the Lord. And my mom has 6 kids. And one of her prayers were for her children to come to the Lord. And as that moment that he said that moment that he told me that, I was like, wow. Like, I'm here right now. I'm here right now. And so, as time kept going on, I was going to church still, but then out of nowhere, I stopped going, right? Because I didn't feel it in me to go anymore. Like, there was, because I didn't know at the time, I didn't know, because I grew up, I was raised in religion. I didn't know that this was all a spiritual battle. I didn't know. So what the enemy was doing, he was pulling me away from the church. So I stopped going to church in July of 2020. And then a couple months later, the months go by, and it's September 2020 now. And I remember I was like, hey, I have Pastor Sharia's number. So I texted her and I was like, hey, I'm ready to come. I want to come to your church. Like, I really want to just go. She's like, yeah, like she was something along the lines of like, yeah, come to church. We would love to have you. I was like, okay, if I don't go this Sunday, I'll go the next. Right? So the first Sunday rolls by, I don't go to church. And she texts me and she's like, hey, like, we miss you at church. Why didn't you come? We would love to have you. And I'm like, okay. So I told her, I said, if I don't go this Sunday coming up, I'll go the next Sunday. And so the week's going by, it's finally Saturday, and I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I want to go to church. Like, like, I'm gonna be the new girl. What if everybody's looking at me some type of way? Like, like I don't want to go to church alone. Like, all these thoughts started going through my mind. And as these thoughts are going through my mind, I'm like, ooh, but I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go anyways. So that following Sunday comes, I go to church. And from that moment on, like, the Lord has wrecked me. The Lord has wrecked me. And so it also takes me to John 6:44, where, I'm sorry, not John 6:44, but Psalms 145:18, where it says, the Lord is near all who call out to him, all who come out to him with integrity. I think I read that earlier. I'm sorry. It was John 6:44. Yeah, I was right the first time. It was John 6:44. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. So it talks about in the Bible how we don't just come to God, but he draws us near to us. And it says that those who call on him, in truth, he will show up. So when I cried out to the Lord, not knowing what I was saying, when I gave my life to Jesus, not knowing what I was doing, not knowing what was going to happen within that year, God was in the midst of it all. In the midst of it all. And why am I sharing my testimony? Number one, like I said earlier, I want you guys to know me as your host. I want you guys to know that, I want to give you guys a little bit of background, right? But not just that. But I also am sharing my testimony for anyone out there who's watching, for anyone out there who's listening, that you are not crazy. You are not weird. You are not whatever people are calling you. If you feel like this urge, if you feel this burning in your heart, if you feel a tug in your heart to come to the Lord, I'm here to tell you that I have been living for the Lord for 4 years now. 4 years. From the moment that I was 20 years old. I gave my life to the Lord at 20 years old. And ever since, he has completely wrecked my life. And so I'm here to truly encourage you. Yeah, I'm here to encourage you. If you are someone who feels that burning, who feels that tug in your heart to go after the Lord, just know that it's not you coming to the Lord, but He's drawing you near to Him. He is saying, son, daughter, come to me. I can help you. I've seen you cry out for help. I've seen you go through these different situations where you get frustrated, where you're angry, where you're trying to figure out what the purpose of life is. I'm drawing you near to me so that I can help you and set you free from everything that you are going through. Because like I mentioned earlier, it is a spiritual battle that we are going through. And what the enemy is trying to do is he's trying to keep you away from pursuing the Lord, because when you truly pursue the Lord, you will begin to step into who you are. And when you step into who you are a threat to the enemy. So he's going to do everything within his power to keep you away from God, to keep you away from stepping into your destiny, to keep you away from stepping into your purpose, because he does not want to feel threatened by you. But I can tell you that from the moment I have given my life to God, it has been so worth it. I have never felt so free in my life after growing up in religion, after dealing with depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, isolation, anger, all these different things that I was going through. I have never felt so free in my life than I do now living for the Lord. So I want to leave it at that. Stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Subscribe to my channel, and just share this with whoever you can. Share this with whoever you feel like needs a word of encouragement. And I just leave it at that. God bless you guys. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.